Hello. So last time I looked at a religious trauma post, it was a younger person, and this time we have an older person. I don't actually know their exact age, but at a certain point in the story, I think they say their husband is in their 50s, so they're presumably similar. And this post is called, "I never knew the extent to which legalist fundies are the worst people in existence until I experienced the way my godly in-laws behaved when my husband and I separated." I don't think I personally have had a lot of experience with legalist fundies, fundamentalists. My thing with labels is that, like, not all legalist fundies are going to be the same as the people in the story. The people in the story aren't necessarily the same as all legalist fundies, but those of you who are more familiar with them maybe can tell me where there's overlap with things that you've experienced as well. But if it seems like I'm missing something obvious, like, oh, of course they would do that, they're legalist fundies, it's just because I'm ignorant. So, cut me a break there. In fact, correct me if you can in the comments, politely. But enough about me. So they say, "Buckle up. This is a wild ride. It is lengthy, but trust me, it's worth the read. Was never intended to be a separation in the first place. My husband and I got in a terrible fight that lasted a whole weekend. When my kids got home from that visit with their bio dad, he was still shouting at me. For the first time in our marriage, I told him he needed to leave because of the shouting. I told him to go stay at his parents' for the night and calm his ass the fuck down. He did. And this one decision has caused absolute chaos to consume my life. I always knew his parents were serious legalist fundies, but I was naive. In 5 years of marriage, they always seemed harmless. They are in their 80s and are intensely religious and are pillars in their church, and basically church is their whole life and always has been. They always seem like your average friendly old people. They insisted I called them mom and dad, that my girls from another marriage call them grandma and grandpa, always bought presents for birthdays and Christmas, took me and the husband out to dinner on our birthdays. She sent out a weekly Bible verse over text. Granted, I knew my husband had a lot of issues because his mom had narcissistic tendencies as he grew up, that his dad was an enabler. As someone with 2 narcissistic abusive parents and someone who spent a year doing trauma work and finally no contact, I understand his experience." To be clear, those are her words, not mine. Although I also have 2 narcissistic abusive parents. I didn't spend a year doing trauma work, though. But I have finally gone no contact. Hooray. Like, it's hooray boo, because I wish I could have a better relationship with my parents, but it seems like it's better if I never hear from them ever again. There's no way I can trust them. Even if they change, I just want them to stay away from me and do good somewhere else. I can never trust them again. I can never get close to them again. So, on the one hand, yay, shouldn't be planting any more pain seeds from that family tree. On the other hand, no good will ever come from them either, not in my life. Oh well. Wasn't my decision. Alright, sorry. Yeah, enough about me. Why is this guy always making it about his abuse? It's like it's his life or something. Yeah, almost. But she said, "As someone with 2 narcissistic abusive parents and someone who spent a year doing trauma work and finally no contact, I understood his experience. Or at least I thought I did. I imagined he would have gone over there for the night and his mom and dad would have sat him down with the Bible and given him a talking to and told him to get a good night's sleep, then go back to his family and stop yelling at his wife. Yeah, no. Hell no, that didn't happen. As I said, I thought I understood, but I would come to find out I had no idea just how fucked up these 2 people were beneath all this religious shit in typical legalist fundy fashion, but worse. I also had no idea just how unresolved his trauma was with his mom and thereby just how deeply under her control he became from as simple of an act of staying with them for one night. The first time, by the way, this ever happened in 5 years. He came back the next day only to inform me he was not coming home but staying with them for a while, and he couldn't say when he'd return because his parents had told him to leave and he wasn't sure what he'd do. At this point, I flipped my shit, and so we had an even bigger fight. He left and went back to them. At that evening, I was informed over email that he was moving out permanently. He wasn't just separating from me, he was divorcing me, and within 72 hours of that email, he came and removed all his shit from my apartment. And when I say removed his shit, if there was anything that woman had ever purchased, it was removed at her direct command. This happened so unexpectedly, I was in a state of shock. We had a huge fight that had been a long time coming after a terrible year of job losses and financial strain. I sent him away to cool off. Now, within 3 days, what the fuck was happening? I thought these people were Christians, big ones. I thought they were the type of Christians and the type of church that would kick people fucking out if they got divorced. It was such a serious thing. I mean, I can't. It made no sense. The cognitive dissonance just fried my brain. But it gets even worse. He was gone, obviously for good. And not only, I only made 50% of our income. He brought in the other half. even then, we always just barely covered the bills. But his piece of shit legalist parents not only insisted he abandon his wife and her daughters that weren't his, but he called his own, and they called him dad, but they were pushing him to walk away and wash his hands of any of our marital financial obligations and dump them all on me. And, oh yes, it gets even worse. My husband was like a fucking zombie. He parroted their every instruction. His sentences always prefaced with, "My mom has told me to," or "My dad said that I should." Dude is 52, by the way. And what followed was even more horrifying. As per their instructions, he was taking his name off all our bills and putting them all in my name. And he was taking his name off our lease. I was informed that he had been informed that I was to go with him to our leasing office, and I had two choices. I could agree to sign permission for him to be off the lease and apply to have a check done to put it in my name. I explained I was not going to qualify with my income. We got the place based on both our combined incomes, and this happened so suddenly I couldn't afford to just move, and I couldn't afford to stay on my own. This is where my second choice came in. If I refused to give my consent, he was just going to take his name off without my consent. If I agreed, they might allow him to help me a little until I could move me and my kids to somewhere I could afford, but if I didn't agree, I could just be homeless. Their plan for him: "Mom and Dad have told me that I can either stay until December or I can move right away, and if I do this, they will buy me a bed for my new apartment." Yeah, he was going to do all this shit and cut ties and just go on his way to his own apartment and leave me with this shit because they told him to. These paragons of Christ-like righteousness. I was fucking distraught and losing my mind, and at the same time still trying to work, clean the house, show up for my online teaching job, and do everything I could to be strong for my 11 and 14-year-old daughters whose whole world had just been turned inside out. I could hardly think straight and numbly agreed to this appointment, but the night before, reality hit me. I said this sounded like bullshit. I said I was going to call the landlord myself. This caused another huge, almost 24-hour fight as all three of them ganged up on me and did everything they could to coerce and attempt to stop me from doing this. Well, I did it. I reached out, and the landlord was dumbfounded. "He can't just take his name off the lease," she said. "It's a legally binding contract. He's responsible for the rent until it's up just as much as you are. Only if you gave him permission would this happen." So there it was. These fucking religious legalist pieces of shit, and my stupid now ex-husband, by the way, who cowed down to their every order, not only told him to deadass abandon me and my kids, completely against everything they supposedly believed in their religion, but they were putting all their effort into making sure he didn't just abandon us, but that he fucked me over and took as much advantage of me as he possibly could, and walk away with no responsibility. And they were doing this because I have no one right now, basically. I was isolated and at home in our marriage. I recently went no contact with my abusive parents, best decision ever, which meant that doing this without their obscene wealth was more important than taking it and being abused. This meant I had no defense, they thought. I was unknown. I had no social relevance. I wasn't connected to anyone in their church. Because with these legalist pieces of shit, they care only that people think they are righteous and godly and perfect. What they do when no one can see doesn't matter. As long as no one knows, yeah. And they were sure that no one would know. They're gonna kick the shit out of a defenseless woman and her children who is now indigent with no one and no way to defend herself because they fucking can, and no one will ever see what they've done. So I thought I would read the story on my channel, with her permission, of course. So now we can all talk about what horrible, horrible things these Christians have done. Also, they assumed that I was ignorant, simple, and perhaps just too stupid to do anything but exactly what they said, because, you know, I am a woman after all. And in their religious perspective, women are in general completely fucking stupid. So stupid, accordingly, that it was a woman's stupidity to eat the forbidden fruit that caused the downfall of man, right? Well, they are dead-ass wrong. I may be a woman, but I'm a strong, determined, resilient motherfucker and a survivor of all I've been through and overcome. And I have 2 master's degrees and a thesis being taught at my university. I'm that woman that those pieces of shit would have burnt at the stake in 1692. I immediately let all of them know that I busted them. He was staying on the lease and he was paying his share. Oh, also, this word indigent, I had to look it up. It means like very poor, basically, or like not able to make ends meet, basically. I told them that, yeah, I might be competent indigent now, but that I called a women's center and I now have a fucking army of advocates and support behind me to stop their exploitation. I had a legal aid lawyer who is also a woman who was meeting with me today to discuss exactly what rights I had and what responsibility Dickless had for our experiences. And most importantly, I informed them, please don't ever underestimate me again. Well, 24 hours later, Dickless has now been given permission to live with them until the lease is up. Oh, and he's paying his half. And not only, but he's now flatly insisting that he pay most of our household bills. Oh, but, of course, if I ever so much as breathe a word of anything that took place, his parents informed me, or rather, anything that I think took place, and any of it got back to their church and harmed their reputation or their sons in any way, they would sue me for slander because, lol, their image as righteous paragons of virtue and Christian perfection is all that matters, not what they actually do. And lastly, guess who is desperately sorry, regrets letting himself be controlled by them, is begging for marriage counseling, regretting all he has done, and will do anything to repair our marriage? Ha! Ha ha! Ha 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 ha! Ha! Too long didn't read. Fundy legalist Christians are the biggest pieces of shit to walk the earth. The end. It's not the end, though. But before we get to the comments, I do want to talk about just the story itself. Like, wow, what a nightmare. This is not uncommon. Like, people just start and end families at the drop of a hat. They're like, oh, well, this is supposedly what's supposed to be good. Oh, it didn't work like I thought. Fuck it. Like, what do you mean, fuck it? There's lives involved. What? There's children involved. So yeah, things we can learn from the story. If someone threatens you with bullshit like that, go above their head. Just talk to whoever's over them, in this case the landlord, and say, they're talking this stuff? Is that like any kind of right? It doesn't sound right. And the landlord was like, no, that's fucking crazy. So that's a good tip, good thing to keep in mind. Really, this is a great story. I like our protagonist here. Just not letting people push her around, even when it's this guy and his parents all ganging up on her and her children, like trying to make her feel like she has no option. That's very familiar. Does legalistic mean something other than how it sounds because what they were trying to do is not legal? Now that you have a lawyer, stop communicating with all three of them. All communication regarding the divorce is to go through your lawyer. Assuming neither of his parents is a lawyer, your lawyer will have nothing to say to them except that she cannot share details of her client's case with them, as you're not divorcing them, you're divorcing your STBX, and they actually have no business with you. If someone says or writes something that is true or an opinion, it's not slander. The greatest black comedy in history is all these fundy superintendents and parent groups claiming teaching Christianity is the way to make these people more virtuous. Ha! Yeah, it's a very upsetting irony. But is it even irony, or is it just lies? Like, people intentionally lying so that they can do bad things and pretend to be good. Not everyone, and that's what makes it hard. Some people are genuinely delusional, and some people are just lying and taking advantage of those people. Legalistic is just a subgenre of Christians, the worst ones, like they are all by and large huge pieces of shit, which is sad to me because the whole point of this faith is to, not be a piece of shit because of, this Jesus dude who did a thing, something like that. Like, these are the ones that focus only what's on the surface, everything invested in making sure they appear righteous and godly. They are empty and shallow and have no substance. They are judgmental of their own kind, so much that they won't hesitate in these churches to kick people the fuck out if they do the wrong thing. One I'm thinking of in particular had these rules where there were elders who would discipline people they decided were behaving in public in ways they didn't agree with. Again, as long as you did whatever where no one could see, game on. And they even said that people weren't allowed to leave the church and join another one until this discipline was completed. In order to join this church, you have to fill out what is like a complex job application, like they're going to do a background check, references and all. And you have to tell them if you've been disciplined by another church. That is weird. At a legalist Christian school around here, they are way whacked out. It costs thousands a year, hundreds to buy these uniforms, yet they don't hire people based on any educational background or teaching credentials. They hired people based on the degree to which they are fellow legalist fundies. Most teachers there may have some bachelor's degree to speak of, rarely in a related field. I've been a teacher for 15 years and counting, and I'm here to tell you, after 2 master's degrees, teacher training is rigorous as fuck, and there's a ton you have to learn, and hell, even when you get your license, you still have to keep learning and doing professional development to keep your license when it's time to renew. It's rare that people can just walk in off the street and start teaching, especially considering this day and time how you have to understand what to do when you have a range of abilities in one classroom that are from kids with severe learning disabilities to kids who are gifted and advanced and those in the middle. You have to know how to differentiate and how to understand and provide accommodations, and most of the time you don't have a special ed co-teacher. Of course, they don't even know what an IEP is at that school and have someone who is supposedly there to be a special ed person but with no credentials or degree whatsoever. They are still in the Stone Ages in the classrooms, books and pencils and paper and no technology to speak of other than a handful of older kids taking online classes, lol. They use this batshit one step above religious homeschool curriculum that is printed and handed out, and none of them know how to teach. Some just stand up and talk for an hour and a half. Others just sit at their desk and hand out worksheets. It is a shit show that costs thousands. And of course, they are anti-science and preach these obsessive, fear-based, hate-based messages to kids each day that compromises so much instructional time, making sure that these kids are taught to hate anyone who is queer or trans or on the LGBTQIA+ spectrum. My favorite parts, though, no school dances, ever. Dances equal girl and boys' bodies being close equals they're going to break out into fucking. They don't even get a prom. They have an athletic banquet where these kids get dressed up like it's prom but are made to sit at gender-separated tables, eat dinner, no music of course, then they go home. And, oh yeah, fuck Halloween, of course. Instead of Halloween, they have Martin Luther Celebration Day, where they fucking celebrate that instead. And these Christian married couples, I've been forced to be around so many. They are robotic. They were raised this way. Yeah, I like to call them drones, honestly. Like, they don't think for themselves. They let God and whoever tells them what God thinks do their thinking for them. It's scary. And just before I read on, the anti-education centers that she was describing are horrifying. That is brainwashing. That is brainwashing that people are paying for. Ignorance is profitable in our country. You wonder why America is so stupid? Christians. Seriously. I wish that wasn't true. I was Christian once, but nope, it's them. They ruined it. People are giving up on intelligence because God is easier. But yeah, robot drones. In these Christian married couples, I've been forced to be around so many. They are robotic. They were raised this way. Went to a psycho-religious school like the one I described then to a psycho-religious college. They picked each other because they were supposed to. They may have held hands before they were married. They get married. But having been conditioned by legalists to see sex as wicked, evil, and dirty, they can't just switch this off once the rings are on. Sex is only to procreate, lights off, no foreplay, missionary, done. Babies come. If the wife worked, she quits, regardless of the financial situation, because this is the way it is done. The husband, because it is the way it is done, works 2-3 jobs to provide everything. For a wife who stays home and homeschools and contributes nothing, as fuck any concept of some kind of partnership where both people share responsibilities and help each other make a life. Man does man things. Woman does woman things. Church and Bible says so. It is ironic because the legalist biblical description of men as the boss and leader and the women submitting is so ridiculously the opposite in these situations I'm describing. The woman is typically uptight, selfish, entitled, and sees her husband not as a partner but as a beast of burden who exists to give her everything she wants while she gives nothing. The man is typically submissive and dominated and kicked around like a dog. There's no love, no realness. Eventually the man turns to porn because there's no sex unless the woman wants another baby because sex is wicked. She eventually catches him, screams and yells and tells the church and shames him, and the whole legalist church disciplines him and he's wrong. She's right, and he's then treated even worse because she's now going to hold this over him for the rest of his life and be even more entitled. And yeah, that was the OP responding to the question about does legalistic mean something other than how it sounds. Also, my friend's out here, so if you hear some other little background sounds, it's just him. All right, and then we have my comment. I certainly hope publishing the truth isn't slander. It comes up so much it feels like a severe understatement. No hate like Christian love. What an awful experience. And she said, yeah, I've already had enough religious trauma growing up. As I said, I had narcissistic, abusive parents, and when I was 14, I lost my virginity to my 16-year-old boyfriend. My psycho mom, who was also fundy legalist when it suited her, found out and sat me down and told me deadass that she hoped I was proud of myself because I was now damaged goods and no man would ever love me or marry me. I was at this psychotic backwoods Christian school and forced to see a psychotic Christian counselor who all reinforced this damning message. I was a child. This was all I knew, so I believed them. Before this, I had this pure faith and belief that God was good. I was even then a Christio-pagan, a half-witch, and saw my virginity as covenant with God like a circle. I dreamed of a permanent love of my life who I'd give my virginity to, and his soul and mine would be fused for eternity and he'd become part of my circle. The boy, being older and wanting sex, said what he needed to say at the time. It's okay if you lose your virginity with me. You know I will marry you someday. Again, because I was young and I'd been raised in such a culture, I didn't know any better. I believed him. So I gave him my virginity and believed he was now mine and I was his for eternity, a forever part of my God circle. But then my mom found out and said what she said. Even as I insisted he said he would marry me, she laughed cruelly and said boys say whatever they can to get sex. You were stupid. He's going to leave you. And oh, how boys will come running after you when he tells everyone that you put out. He did leave me, and not long after, and he did tell everyone. It was horrific. I was a slut, a whore, a pariah. Everyone said it. And the boys did come, the wrong ones, pushing themselves at me as if they were entitled to get me to do it with them too, since I'd done it with the one guy. And all I knew was that my God circle had a hole ripped in it when he went away and took something from me that I could never get back, and therefore my mother was right. I would always be a damaged, torn-up circle. I believed that what I was done was so bad that even God had turned from me. I believed I was ruined. Therefore, nothing mattered. So I began to have sex with anyone, because why not? I was ruined. I used to make A's in school, but what was the point? I started to fail everything. I was once committed to purity so much that I promised God I would never even drink caffeine. What did it matter? I started drinking and using drugs and smoking and self-harming. I developed an eating disorder because starving myself was the only way I could even get close to feeling the purity I'd lost forever. That's a big problem with any belief system that's rooted in absolutes. You either get heaven or you get hell. If you lose access to heaven, what's stopping you from plunging into hell? And that's very unhealthy. From that moment, and for almost 2 decades, I was lost in such darkness, broken and fucked up beyond all repair, mental health issues, hospitalizations, and a substance abuse disorder that plagued me until 8 years ago I finally got sober for good. And it was 8 years ago, almost 20 years later, that someone would finally come into my life to tell me that none of that was ever true, that God is recovery was God in whatever form I chose. And I also learned something so shocking, the most shocking thing of all, surrounded by all these supposed religious Christian people. I really never knew this, and none of them ever told me. According to the actual literal faith these people claim, there was this guy, Jesus I think his name was. He lived a hell a long time ago, traveled around spreading this message that had something to do with loving one another. He hung out with the worst of the worst. He even made it fucking clear, apparently, that he had nothing but contempt for legalistic fucks who make a huge show of being righteous but are full of shit about it. And, oh yeah, that other part. The whole thing where he apparently died on a cross for all of the sins of humanity, past, present, and future. All of the sins, even little girls who lose their virginity with a boyfriend and decide after it was a terrible mistake. That even these little girls were heirs to the grace of life. And what's more mind-blowing of all, this Jesus guy, what his sacrifice offered. Accordingly, as unimaginable I know as it may seem, all that distraught, regretful little girl needed was one of these self-appointed representatives of this faith to have told her the rest of the story. Her torn-up circle could have been restored to wholeness by the simple act of asking this Jesus guy to restore her purity. I'm not fucking around. For 20 goddamn years I suffered, surrounded by these pieces of empty, cruel shit. And it was more important to look down their nose and condemn me and cast me aside and stomp me down, elevate themselves by observing how much better and more righteous they were than this little girl who suffered all the way until she was an adult, going absolutely out of her mind and coming unraveled because this was more important than actually sharing with me what was the core actual fucking truth of this faith. I have daughters now. My eldest is 14, my youngest is 12, and my entire life, ever since they drew their first breath, has been devoted to making sure they never experience anything like what I went through, that they are loved, and nothing and no one will ever change just how right they are, as they are, no matter what. And yeah, that... you know, I'm pretty sure even the Christians will be mad at this one. Like, they didn't tell her about Jesus? Yikes! But they discourage you from asking questions, like... They probably made it sound like there was no way of restoring her faith. Like, this is how things are, this is how things are. What, were they saving the Jesus reveal for later when she was about to jump? And yeah, pretty much we all agreed that telling the truth is not slander. If I got any of the details wrong, please correct me. But this is the truth as far as we are aware. And it's a horrible, ugly truth that a lot of people want to pretend isn't even happening. We could use more actual educational institutions, not for-profit brainwashing centers. But I don't think anyone's going to build any, so we probably just have to do it ourselves online. Also, my friend has joined a call or something, so I'm going to end this here. Thank you for watching. If you have any stories like this, please send them to me and I'll try to read them. Other than that, I don't know what'll be next. See you then.